Some of you may already know that scientists have discovered that our brains actually automatically rewire themselves, and this actually continues throughout our life. By making use of this, we found ways that we can actually avoid getting the dangers of dementia, and that it is possible that the brain can recover from injury. Welcome again to today's Peace Unplugged. I'm going to be looking today at something called neuroplasticity. That is in fact the way that brains can repair. Here's an interesting fact. For over 400 years, scientists believed that the brain was fixed. The brain was fixed and could not change. It was reckoned that if you didn't learn something as a child, that was just tough luck. Also, that if you'd suffered brain, you were just stuck with the consequences forever. What if this is completely wrong? What if your brain, right now, as you're watching and listening to this, is actually forming new neural connections all the time? It's what neuroplasticity is. It's the ability for the brain to reorganize itself. And this goes on throughout our lives. This isn't just science. It's information that can transform how we learn and also recover from setbacks. It's why all these therapies have been developed to help recover from injuries. So let's explore this a little bit further. This is about the London Hackney Cab Drivers. In the late 1990s, a neuroscientist named Eleanor Maguire, University College London, had a question. What happens to the brains of London Hackney Cab drivers? These drivers spend years memorising over 25,000 different streets in London, and also they undergo intense training, and that's called the knowledge, and it can take up to 3 to 4 years to qualify. Eleanor Maguire used MRI scans to examine the brains of the London taxi drivers. This is what she discovered. It's in what's called the posterior hippocampus. That's the area of the brain that navigates spatial ability. She discovered that in the London taxi drivers, this area was significantly larger, and that is compared to other controlled tests that she made. The study found that the longer a person had been driving the London cab driver, the larger the area of the increase in the brain size in that region. So here's a scientific reference, is Maguire et al. 2000, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So is this not convincing evidence? The adult brain physically changes in response to learning and experience. It wasn't that just people who had great spatial skills became taxi drivers. It is the job itself as a taxi driver that proved the brain was reshaping. This tells us that understanding our daily activities, our habits, and our learning directly improves our brain function throughout our lives. That is, of course, if we choose to use it. Here's another scientific reference. Maguire, E.A. et al. 2000, related structural change in the hippocampi of taxi drivers, PNAS 97 8 4398-4403. So let's now get to segment 2, and we'll look at stroke recovery constraint. Specifically, that is induced movement therapy. Stroke affects around 100,000 people in the UK and 800,000 in the USA. That's annually. And we know that a stroke can leave survivors with paralysis or severe movement impairment. I saw this happen to my mother over 20 years ago. And believe me, it's very distressing to witness. It's thought that traditional rehabilitation has limited success. Many patients plateaued in their recovery. And again, I witnessed this with my mother. The thoughts back then were that if you hadn't made a significant recovery within 6 months of treatment, that you probably never would. Now let's talk about a gentleman called Edward Taub. He did some groundbreaking work at the University of Alabama. Taub developed something called constraint-induced movement therapy, or CIMT. What it does is it forces stroke patients to use their impaired limbs, and that is by restraining the functional ones. Sounds cruel, doesn't it? But Taub had this hypothesis, and that was that the brain could be forced to rewire itself, particularly around the damaged areas. Apparently, the results of this were extraordinary. Patients who underwent CIMT showed significant improvements in their motor function and this occurred even years after the treatment. Brain imaging revealed that the motor cortex had literally reorganized itself. That was the healthy regions taking over, particularly where areas had been damaged. Scientific reference, that's Taub et al. 2006, known as stroke. The research revolutionized stroke rehabilitation and revealed that neuroplasticity could be harnessed in a therapeutic manner. And that's even after a severe brain injury. Again, the scientific reference. E. et al. 2006. Method for enhancing real-world use of more affected arm in chronic stroke. Stroke 37 in brackets 6 1383-1388. Let's move on to a third section, and one that particularly interests me for obvious reasons, is musical training and cognitive enhancement. You see, lots of kids get the chance to learn to play music in school, and parents often encourage them to do so. I'll share with you that when I was 11 years old, I had the opportunity to learn to play a brass instrument and join a school brass band. And that was for nothing. There was no payments to be made by my parents at all. So I was very fortunate in that area. As a result of that, music firmly became part of my life. So is there any science behind the benefit? Researchers at Northwestern University decided to investigate whether musical training actually changes the brain's structure and function. The challenge was distinguishing correlation from causation. The question is, do musicians have different brains because they practice music? Or do people with certain brain characteristics become musicians? To answer this, researchers carried out comprehensive, that is before and after music training. Multiple studies now confirm that music training enhances the neuroplasticity across multiple brain regions. A 14 meta-analysis in Nature Reviews Neuroscience found that musicians showed enhanced connectivity between motor, auditory, and visual regions. Even more compelling was that children who received just 2 years of music lessons showed improvements in executive function, language processing, and auditory discrimination compared to control. That is from Krauss and Chandrasekaran, 2010, Nature Reviews of Science. So there we have it again. The brain literally builds new neural pathways to handle the complex demands of playing music. Again, from a personal perspective, the joy of playing, singing and performing is unsurpassed for ways to maintain a decent mental health. I can recall so many times when I've spoken to people after a musical performance and them asking me, well, I wish I'd learned to play an instrument when I was younger. The truth is, it's never too late. So again, the scientific reference, that's Krauss N and Chandrasekaran B, 2010, Music Training for the Development of Auditory Skills. Nature Reviews Neuroscience 11-8-599-605. Now let's move on to part 4. Another one of these of mine that is a keen interest, that is meditation and structural brain changes. For thousands of years, traditions have claimed that meditation transforms the mind. Once I started engaging in meditation, I concluded that many belief systems engage in forms of meditation. The simple act of prayer from all different traditions is actually a form of meditation. What it's actually doing is focusing the mind. Apparently, neuroscientists remain skeptical about this until they can measure physical changes. Something as simple as sitting quietly and focusing on the breath can alter the brain structure. So we refer to a lady by the name of Sarah Laser and her colleagues at Harvard Medical School recruited meditation novices and put them through an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction, that's MBSR program. They took MRI scans before and after the training. So would 8 weeks of this training prove some measurable results? Those results apparently stunned the scientific community. After just 8 weeks, participants showed increased grey matter in the hippocampus. That's the part of the brain that's important for learning and for memory. And also decreased density in the amygdala. That's the part that's associated with stress and anxiety. The control group showed no changes. That's from Holzel et al., 2011. psychiatry research, neuroimaging. This apparently demonstrated that mental training alone, without physical exercise or medication, could reshape brain structure. It opened up ways for treating anxiety and for depression and all sorts of other stress-related problems through neuroplasticity-based interventions. Again, refer to the scientific references. That's Holzel B.K. et al. 2011. Mindfulness practice leads to increases in regional brain grey matter density. Psychiatry research, neuroimaging, 191 in brackets 1 36-43. Again, indulge me for a moment. Here's some of my own thoughts. Look at how meditation improves performance in sports. Have you ever noticed the absolute focus of a football player when he's tasked with taking a penalty? The most successful at that are the ones that go into that deep focus prior to striking the ball. They block out all other distractions. And very much the same thing happens in athletics. Again, it's that deep focus. So now let's move on to part 5, the relationship between age and neuroplasticity. It's never too late. It seems the biggest myth about neuroplasticity is that it's something that only refers to young people. Hence the old-fashioned saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's tempting for many of us that are older to avoid learning new skills. We think we've become too rigid in our thought processes to learn anything new. Again, here's some evidence. Research from the University of California and the Max Planck Institute tells a different story, where older adults, aged 60 to 90, were taught to juggle for 3 months, and researchers found something remarkable. Despite decades of conventional wisdom suggesting that aging brains lose plasticity, these older people showed measurable increases in grey matter in visual and motor regions. Now, as a 62-year-old, I really love to be able to learn to juggle. I've tried in the past and always failed. I'm now thinking perhaps that's not impossible. There's nothing wrong with giving it a try. Now then, let's have it. No, I don't think so. Not yet, anyway. Maybe I ought to just take some lessons in that. The study published in Nature in 2004 proves that neuroplasticity persists throughout the lifespan. That's Dragansky et al. 2004, Nature. It says apparently that while the rate of change may slow with age, the capacity remains. More recent research shows that older adults can form new neurons in the hippocampus well into their 80s, and this implies that cognitive decline isn't inevitable, and interventions targeting neuroplasticity, from learning new languages to physical exercise, could help maintain brain health into old age. The brain we have at age 70 is not fixed. It's waiting to be challenged and changed. Again, the scientific reference is Dragansky B. et al. 2004, Neuroplasticity, Changes in Grey Matter Induced by Training, Nature, 427-6972, 311-312. My further thoughts here are also recalling a story I heard about a 19-something gentleman in a care home who practiced his violin every day. And he was asked the question, why do you bother to continue practicing every day at age 90? His answer was, well, I'm getting better. So what's the future of neuroplasticity? What is the future of neuroplasticity research? It's a difficult word to pronounce. It seems we're standing at the beginning of new research into this area. Perhaps it's a new kind of revolution. Current research is pushing it from observation to actual intervention. Scientists are developing technologies that can amplify the brain's neural ability and help it to rewire itself. Apparently 3 areas are showing promise in this, but they also ask some questions. First, non-invasive brain stimulation techniques, like what's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, and transcranial direct current stimulation, that is TDCS, can enhance neuroplastic changes during learning or rehabilitation. Secondly, pharmacological approaches are identifying compounds that could boost neuroplasticity temporarily, creating windows for accelerated learning and recovery. Thirdly, brain-computer interfaces might allow direct communication between neural circuits and external devices, potentially bypassing the damaged areas entirely. we may soon be able to treat the untreatable neurological conditions like Alzheimer's, perhaps even restore functions after spinal cord injuries. We might be able to enhance learning in ways we'd never realised. Research published in the Nature Neuroscience in 2023 demonstrated that combining brain stimulation with targeted therapy accelerated motor learning by 30 to 40% in healthy adults. There are some ethical questions, though. If we can enhance neuroplasticity, should we do so? If so, who gets access to it? Where do we draw the line between treatment and enhancement? These are the questions that are going to dominate in the future. So let's look at some proposed solutions. So problem number 1, difficulty learning new skills as an adult. Suggested solution, deliberately practice with focused attention. Neuroplasticity requires engagement. Passive consumption doesn't rewire the brain. Dedicate 20 to 30 minutes a day to practice your target skill. Problem number 2, recovery from brain injury or stroke appears limited. The solution? Seek out neuroplasticity solutions. Seek out neuroplasticity-based therapies like constraint-induced movement therapy, intensive task-specific training, or working with rehabilitation specialists who understand the principles. Recovery can continue for years, not just months. Problem number 3, age-related cognitive decline. Solution? Engage in lifelong learning and novel experiences. Learn to play a musical instrument. Learn a new language. Learn a new complex skill after age 60. I've got a friend of mine similar age to me who recently asked me if I teach him to play the trombone. Now, this has the possibility of providing some incredible protection against any brain function decline. Look at physical exercise, particularly activity. This promotes neuroplasticity and also neurogenesis. Problem number 4, chronic stress and anxiety that damages brain health. Solution? Implement mindfulness-based practices. Just 10 to 20 minutes daily of meditation or mindfulness can produce measurable structural changes in reducing stress, and that's in brain regions over 8 weeks. Problem number 5, plateauing in skill development. The solution? Introduce variability and challenge. Neuroplasticity apparently responds to novelty and difficulty. Once a skill becomes automatic, the brain stops changing. So continually adjust the difficulty levels. Learn related skills. Add some complexity to it. That's all I've got to say for today's podcast. As usual, stay safe. Keep connected with people. Keep on learning. Wishing you all the best. Martin.